welcome to episode 172 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat podcast form that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. As always, I'm your host, Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin today's episode, just a couple things to kind of go over as per usual. First off, if you haven't already, follow and subscribe to the podcast. We're on 9 or 10 audio platforms, so that includes all the big ones: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, and I think there's 6 smaller ones as well. So wherever you can find your podcast on audio, we're there. So if you can subscribe, rate 5 stars, allows the podcast to grow a little bit easier. And then in addition to that as well, we're also on video, so you can watch us in full video format on YouTube. And you can simply search The Route Podcast or search us at The Routecast. That's our username for all socials. And then you can see us via video as well, and the clips that kind of come with the podcast too. Building on that too, as I mentioned, The Routecast, where you can find us on YouTube. That's our same social handle for all social media platforms. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. So all those good ones, you can find us there. Maybe more importantly, just in regards to who's listening and who we have on the podcast, we're also on LinkedIn. That's a little bit different from other ones. So that's just because it's a great way to connect with guests, maybe start your network, grow your network, maintain it, connect with us there. We have these little posts each week just outlining what the episode's about and who you can see is going to be featured that week. So just check us out there, out at the Routecast, on all platforms. And with that, we can get into today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who has experience in branding, marketing, and partnerships, and who is now the head of marketing at Montana's Barbecue and Bar, Yianni Fountas. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Good, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were just chatting about this before we started recording. We've been planning, trying to get this going for a little bit of time now. I'm glad we finally, were able to do so. So I guess with that, the name of the podcast, The Route. Do you mind maybe sharing how yours began and how we got here today?
Yeah, absolutely, and I hope it lives up to the hype here. This back and forth for the last couple months, hopefully make it worth it for the listeners. But yeah, I grew up in Kingston. Didn't always want to get into business, actually. I originally wanted to be a hockey player. I just, I wasn't any good, so that was a little bit of a problem taking the next step in that career. But kind of heading into university, I was looking at becoming a pediatrician. A very minor injury in high school hockey practice. Took off my glove, saw blood, passed out, and my coach had to drive me to the hospital. So, just to get fixed up quickly there. And as my mom walked in, the first thing she said to me was, "You still want to be a doctor?" So, naturally, next day I went in. Changed all my science classes into business, not really knowing what business was or what I was getting into, but my mom has a degree in business. My dad was an entrepreneur, so I didn't know exactly what they did, but I figured, hey, business was a pretty safe bet, considering both of them were in it. Went to Queen's University, stayed local in Kingston, and graduated with a BCom, focusing in marketing and sales. Time at Queens was awesome. I had a lot of great experiences there for someone who was a local kid. Didn't really hinder, getting out, meeting people. Took advantage of all the extracurriculars, different social clubs and committees that plan different student-run events and conferences. And that kind of got me into dealing with a bunch of different corporate contacts. Setting up different sponsorships or different speakers, and I thought it set me up nicely to kind of explore different avenues on what I could get into. And kept those relationships throughout my 4 years at Queen's. But as I was kind of getting in to the interview stages of internships, I wasn't really landing any of the key roles, or I'll call it on-campus recruiting roles. Frankly, at some points my grades probably weren't good enough to get into some of them anyways. But I always kind of got the same feedback that you're more of a natural sales guy. And for whatever reason, I hated the term. I think I had this dated stereotype of what a salesperson was, and I just kept trying to fight it. So I continuously applied to these different jobs, and it finally landed an internship actually with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. Maybe not so coincidentally, on their sales team there. Worked there for 2 summers, and despite having an offer to go back there, I was determined not to go into sales. So I actually ended up accepting a role with Chubb Insurance, corporate insurance, underwriting fiduciary and financial liability and risk, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything that I took in school or anything that I thought my first career would look like. And spent a few years there, really just learning the ropes of the corporate world. It was my first time kind of being in an office structure like that. It was a lot more formal than MLSE. So I just really took advantage of getting out there, setting myself up, moving cities, and tried to learn as much as I could. But it came to a certain point, after a few strong performance quarters, let's call it, and being a 24-year-old know-it-all that, thought he was ready to be the CEO, I was looking for more. And I kept comparing myself to some close friends that had graduated from Queens with me, and they had kind of gone into more of the accounting and finance work streams, and I envied that. I thought that was more of a hard skill that seemed like a more successful position, and so I started to apply to different banking roles, not really getting too far in the interview process, just frankly just didn't have the in-depth knowledge that you needed to kind of go into corporate banking. So with that, I decided to do a little bit of a 180 and went back to school and pursued my MBA at York University and graduated from the Schulich School of Business. This was kind of I'll call it spontaneous move. It was a real now or never. It was May 2014 when I decided that I wanted to do this, and it's a little late to start the process to get into these programs. With semesters typically starting in September, but I was determined, so I pulled a little bit of a hurry-up offense here. Applied to a couple different schools and got in contingent on writing the GMAT within the month, which for anyone who's written the GMAT knows that that's quite a condensed timeline. So it was a bit hectic there for that month, managing a full-time job and studying, but it happened the way it happened. I ended up leaving my job a few months later and then enrolling and starting in September, really with the hopes of just going through on-campus recruiting again. I looked back at my time at Queens and I thought, hey, if I structured this right, and now that I know that I want to do, that on-campus recruiting would really lend a hand and potentially bridge the gap of getting into one of these banking programs and start, in a rotational program or somewhere in the bank that I could then move my way up. I was kind of going through the phases. It was pretty unique with the accelerated program that I was in as well. It was only 1 year, so I was at school for a matter of weeks before I started this recruiting process. And I don't even know if I knew all my profs' names at that point. It was so early in the semester. And I was just going through the motions. I was going through different interviews, different case studies, and things were progressing, but I didn't really know where in the bank I wanted to fit in. I knew I wanted to go into banking. And it was simply chasing that idealistic dream. When a couple of friends actually who worked at Cara, now Recipe, made me aware of an opportunity for a brand manager position, actually at Montana's. So I thought, what's the harm? I'll take a meeting or go for a chat and see where this goes. And sure enough, a few days later, I had an offer in my hands to start as the brand manager. And not really looking back, I just kind of told myself, hey, if it fails, you can always go back. Let's give this a try. That was 9 years ago, so safe to say it did work out. It's been 9 years with Karen Recipe. Started as a brand manager, like I said, with Montana's, and it really took me probably a year to figure out what I was doing. I didn't really have any formal marketing experience in the real world. I'd taken different courses at both, the undergrad and MBA level. But it was all theory, and I didn't really feel like I could make an impact or really drive anything forward, and that was frustrating in itself. So, you kind of go through that progression, going back and forth, really questioning, was this the right move? Is this really, for me? But the restaurant industry was just something I was drawn to. I mentioned my dad was an entrepreneur. He actually owned and operated a few local independent restaurants in Kingston when I was growing up before he moved into more of a real estate career. And I don't know if it was osmosis from just being around the restaurant all the time or, the small part-time jobs I had working at a retirement facility in the kitchen or at the keg as a teenager going into Queens. But I seemed to get it, and I really loved the opportunity to directly connect with the consumer. It was something that I felt, not a lot of other marketing positions offered because, things move so quickly that when you put something into market, there's almost that immediate feedback. You know how people are perceiving it. whether they're enjoying it, and you actually get direct feedback all the time, whether you want it or not. So it was a unique industry that just felt like a natural fit. I needed to climb a couple stairs before I felt, I think, a little bit more comfortable in my place and position. So was there with the brand in the brand management role for a few years, and then kind of turned into a little bit of a Swiss Army knife and moved around the company in not so formal rotational program. I went from Montana's into leading digital sales, so e-commerce and like the third-party aggregators like Skip the Dishes, Uber Eats, DoorDash, for a division of brands. That's kind of what I was really focusing on while I was at Montana's and launching that program. And from there, I went into business development and growth, and actually got to spearhead the creation, strategic development, and launch of a brand new concept and a virtual kitchen that, timing had it, launched right in March of 2020. So good timing there with a lot of our brick and mortar restaurants closing. And that somehow led into expanded roles, taking on our enterprise partnerships, negotiating with partners like Scene Plus, CAA, and Google, and then taking on the evolution and relaunch of our business insights team. So it was quite a mixed bag of hats I was wearing there, but it led to a lot of great opportunity to just get more exposure to the business and see how different parts of the whole thing works, because it is just this massive building, and it's easy to get lost in. So with that, there was an opportunity to come back to Montana as a little bit of a full circle moment for me. And in November of 22, I rejoined the brand as the lead of the marketing team, and haven't looked back since.
Appreciate you mentioning all that. It sounds like a great route so far. And typically I like going back to the beginning, and then we'll work our way to where we are now. So some of the questions I had maybe at the beginning of route, I find, having done, this podcast for 170 plus episodes now, I feel like everyone always hits that fork in the road. Very rarely do people just go, in a straight line. And I think that first maybe fork in the road you had was in regards to that injury you had, right? Where your mom maybe asked you, do you still want to go into medicine? How old were you at that point in time, if you don't mind me asking?
I was grade 11, so I think I just turned 17 at that point.
Okay, so that's probably right around the time where maybe you'd be looking at post-secondary, kind of having those initial steps to kind of move on from there, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Everything was lined up for, trying to get into pre-med. Everything was sciences I was taking, and funny enough, I went into the guidance counselor that next day, and I couldn't switch the courses mid-semester, but everything I could switch, I did, and started taking more math, accounting, and economics, just to try and bolster the resume to then make a switch into a different academic study.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I guess just building on that, because I remember when I was in high school, I was pretty set on business. I also just wanted to have fun in high school. I wanted to do that advanced gym classes and kind of do all this stuff. And my dad maybe forced me. He wouldn't sign my paper when it said my electives were advanced gym and, like a movie class. He made me take entrepreneurship and advanced math. And obviously it paid off now. But did you ever have those moments maybe in high school beyond medicine? Or was it always that was your focus until that injury happened?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it probably had similar influence, to be honest. I mentioned, my dad was an entrepreneur. He immigrated over here at a young age. So he valued education because it was something that it wasn't available to him when he came over. Or not in the way that it was to, myself and everyone these days. So he had that same type of viewpoint, and hockey was something that came second to it. I know it's cliche, and, you kind of mentioned a similar experience, but if test marks weren't at a certain level, you weren't going to the tournament that weekend, and so I look back and didn't really look at it as a fork in the road, and didn't really appreciate what they were pushing me towards, but apparently they knew my hockey skill level before I did, and they knew that dream wasn't going to work out, and I think whatever I ended up doing, they just wanted to make sure that it was something where I was at least educated and could kind of go out and do something on my own. And so they pushed that way. I think they were a little surprised, to be honest, that I was going back, for a master's after what they went through to drag me through high school and undergrad. But no, it was something that was always really valued around our household, and there was always time to kind of sit down, do homework. Like I said, my mom had a business degree, so she was kind of the one probably more in the weeds teaching us and making sure we were doing things right. But I felt that support and that guidance from both my parents really throughout. Sports was always secondary. It was always something to get out of the house and do something different and meet new people outside of the people you're going to school with. So looking back, yeah, it was definitely a fork in the road, and then I look back now and thank them for I guess the little extra pressure that they probably had to put on me at the time.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And I guess building on that too, going to your undergrad degree at Queens, I have a couple of questions there because our audience base is kind of varied from all ages, from let's say people entering university to people that have been a corporate professional for 20 years now, right? So I kind of tried to ask questions for everyone so they have a little bit of nuggets that can apply to them. And I've had teenagers reach out before on Instagram about university or different things like that. So in regards to that question, I did something similar to you in regards to Queens. I'm from Ottawa. I went to Ottawa, and I think I didn't really realize until the end how to fully maximize it, where I was still maybe hanging out with my high school friends a lot and not doing as many clubs or meeting other people. And I kind of only realized that at the end. And then my fiance, or even my sister to an extent, they left for university and they had a completely different experience than I had. I find there's that happy medium, and it sounds like you may have had that, where you're able to still live at home, have those benefits there, but at the same time leverage the opportunities that the school has too. You may maybe touch on that.
I mean,
to balance that. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't by plan or design. I'll tell you that. Like, it was like a lot of my story here. It's a little bit of a zigzag, and a lot of things. I'll call them opportunistic. They came up, and I loved what I was doing, so I jumped at moving forward with it. So, yeah, I was similar to a lot of kids, I think, that grow up in a university town. Like, I wanted to go away for school. Didn't know why, didn't know what I was going to do, but the idea of leaving home and having some independence was important to me at that age. And as I started to do some of the campus recruiting visits and stuff like that, there was a natural fit there, at Queens, and it was, aside from the fact that it was 5 minutes down from the house, where I currently lived, I felt like that was the place for me. And I think honestly, the people that I met early and the friends that I still have to this day kind of probably forced me out of reverting back to just hanging out with buddies from high school or local friends, because they were getting involved, and so it made me want to get involved. There was all these stories. There's almost this fear of missing out type of thing, right? It was, you wanted to be in and you wanted to make friends there as well. And I also think just the structure of the program at the time, like, it was sub 300 students at a time, or per year, I should say. So you got to know everyone in your class pretty quickly. I think there were more kids in my high school than there were actually at the Queen's School of Business at the time, like throughout the 4 years, which is pretty incredible to say, because Kingston's not that big of a town. But I think that close-knit community, it really lended itself to information and opportunities, kind of traveling throughout friend groups or networks a little quicker and easier, and B, just wanting to be a part of it and kind of diving in head first. As soon as I kind of joined that first club and started to meet new people and integrate again with more senior years and get to know different people that you ultimately look up to, and look to for guidance going through some of these experiences for the first time, it made it really easy, and I didn't look back, to be honest. I'm sure my high school friends probably have something different to say about those choices and how much I was around and available, but it wasn't something that I actively thought about, but it was something that, looking back, definitely skewed towards diving in and making the most of the experience, despite being, a local and from Kingston.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I guess building on your university experience as well, funny enough, same type of thing where you're talking about sales, where it was almost sounding like a dirty word. I remember when I was in university for marketing, I've said this a few times on the podcast now. I had a second year course. The marketing prof goes, who wants to be in sales? It's probably a class of 88 kids, and no one rose their hand, like not a single person. And then he's like, well, a lot of you are probably going to become, salespeople, just in regards to, marketing and your personality traits, etc. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Looking back, it does. But I think maybe something similar there, where people were kind of always telling you you're a natural salesperson. How were you able to balance that? And then especially going to MLSE for sales, what was that process like? Because obviously maybe initially that wasn't something you wanted to get into, and then obviously you moved away from it as well. So what was that experience like, just balancing, something that you maybe didn't necessarily want it to be attached to?
Yeah, no, it's like, for whatever reason, like I mentioned, it was like this idea of like a door-to-door salesman or like a used car salesman, for lack of a better term, that I associated with the term, and receiving that feedback, with not getting a job or kind of progressing through the interview process, I didn't know how I could take it any other way other than, not qualified or just not good enough, and just needed to go towards something that was a little bit more, I'll call it a soft skill or easy, right? So there was this whole chip on my shoulder to prove myself, really, and I think when you surround yourself with people, in any business program that are landing all these different jobs and opportunities, the instinct within you at that age is to want to fit in. You don't have the perspective, I think, that any of us do now. Like you mentioned, like I think in some way, shape, or form, we're all in sales, whether it's internal or external, and in marketing, 100%. Maybe not be directly through selling, but what I'm ultimately doing is trying to get people to come in and buy things at the end of the day. So yeah, it was tough. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think that I actually got that perspective until after my first career. And going to MLSE was an awesome experience. I mean, it's funny, like all my friends were envious of my summer internship, and I was looking back at them, right? Like they thought this was like the mecca of all things to be working for such a prestigious company and in sports. Besides the fact that I grew up as a Habs fan in Kingston, it was a little shameful walking in the white and blue door there. But it was an awesome experience, and I took it for what it was. I didn't begrudge anything. I was incredibly happy that I got the opportunity to move to Toronto for the summers. I kind of looked at it as I did the opposite of what the average student would do, right? They go away for school and then they come back and they work at home for the internship or for the summer, and I did vice versa, where I stayed home and then I'd actually move away for the summer and go get some experience and more specifically corporate experience during the summers off. So back to your question, I don't know that I fully appreciated what sales could do, or just how you could use some of those skill sets in different roles or apply them in different ways within the corporate structure. I was focused on salespeople were salespeople, and there was no aspect of it anywhere else. And that's obviously, like I mentioned, and like you pointed out, it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think just kind of building on that too, I think something you mentioned right after, where maybe, I don't want to say let's say hit a wall, but maybe let's say using that fork in the road example again, where I think you're saying you're 24, you had a couple good quarters, and you're seeing your colleagues from business school, like, hey, like I want to do something else. How were you able to manage that, right? Where you'd be doing like a significant switch, let's say from MLSE in sales to something else that you were saying that maybe you didn't necessarily study in that school. What was that switch like? Because I think you were saying at the time you were 24. So using a personal example here, last year I was 25. I was doing an interview process because, I hit a fork in the road of my own. I still remember one of the interviews I had, considering I only graduated a couple of years ago. They were saying, hey, like you seem like you don't know what you want to do, just in regards to working in sports, having my own business, etc. And I was kind of curious if you had any of those similar, let's say, trials and tribulations going through the interview process, or maybe switching over away from that initial career, and how that was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's ultimately what led me to go back to school. I wasn't having any success kind of just interviewing off the street or working with any recruiters at that point in time when I was at Chubb. And so I looked at myself and said, listen, if you want this, then there's, in my mind at that point, there was only one path to getting it, and going through, going through the school route. And again, that on-campus recruiting that I looked back at my time at Queen's and really valued, and realized I probably didn't take as much advantage as I could have or should have in exploring these different careers. But I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, those walls happen, and I don't know that I had a prescribed plan on getting through it. I think similar to what you described, Chris, I was always up for the next challenge, and I love the aspect of competing, and I think that was instilled in me from a young age. And just, I can figure anything out. I might not be the smartest in the room, but ultimately you can choose, if you're going to be outworked. And that was kind of the mentality I had. And again, I think that built the chip on the shoulder a little bit. So yeah, I hit roadblock after roadblock trying to, switch industries and switch careers. And ultimately that's where I settled on going back to school. And again, didn't even end up with that master plan, kind of fell backwards into something else, and haven't looked back since.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point where I know at least I can relate to that just in regards to like thinking back to that time interviewing, right, where I kind of wanted to maybe do a switch of my own and switch industries, and then it seemed like I was kind of not having success either in my interviews, where people maybe because I had my own business, they're like, oh, like it'd be a risk taking you on to an extent because they're like no one can validate for you to an extent. I was like, okay, like I'll come into an entry level sales role and hopefully move up with time, which I did. But then that was kind of an interesting perspective. Now going back to what we were talking about earlier about sales, where I think now that you're starting to develop those skill sets and you're proving, hey, this experience you previously had, you can start seeing, hey, like these are the different opportunities that could then come from it, which sounds similar in regards to that MBA you then had. I know you said it was a like not brief, but like something that you made on almost like on a whim.
Yeah,
like, I'm going to do it now, and I have to take that GMAT within a month.
Yeah.
Was there something that happened for you to be like, hey, this is why I need to do it, and I need to do it right now?
It's a good question. I look back. I don't know that there was one specific event. I think I knew probably within the first year of being at Chubb and in the underwriting role that like this wasn't going to be my lifetime career. But back at that time, switching companies wasn't looked at the same way as it is now. Gaining different experience, and so I really wanted to stick it out at least for a few years. It was my first corporate career at a school. And so I got to a point where I didn't see the road ahead of me, and I think I was just getting more and more frustrated, and I could feel myself just bearing weight on other parts of my life, right? Like I didn't have any drive or direction necessarily. I was just kind of comfortable being, and yeah, you're getting some small wins and successes at work, but ultimately that those accolades didn't really mean much because it wasn't my definition of success or what I was doing anything I was doing that was actually going to make me feel fulfilled. And so, I, like I said, there wasn't one specific event, but there was a now or never mentality for whatever reason, and I kind of jumped in head first. I have no idea what would have happened if it didn't go the way it did. I might still be in that industry. But yeah, the things worked out the way they did, and I think the pressure is also something that I typically like. I need, and I like to kind of work under those kind of it can't be done or it's going to be tough, and again that just adds to the mentality of rising to the challenge, and it's something that I still thrive and indulge in today. If there's a pressure situation, it's something I usually like to jump into head first.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, and I guess building on your MBA experience as well, because that's why I do this podcast. I have some of my own personal questions, and hopefully it relates to others as well at times. But just touching on your point of MBA, that's definitely something I've thought of as well before. And correct me if I'm wrong. Was the MBA the thing you were referring to, where it kind of felt a little more theory based and became a little frustrating?
Well, like at a certain point, yeah. I mean, I only did my MBA for a year, so just with the BCom background, I was able to enter in the accelerated program. So that kind of it almost flew by. Like I don't really look back at my time at Schulich the same way I do at Queens, only because of the nature of the program. I was a little bit more mature. I was honestly there for a means to an end, and there for all of 10 months as well. So you don't get the chance to make those same types of friendships or those lasting relationships. There really wasn't time to get involved with anything extracurricular. It was very transactional, right? Like it was in and out. There was a ton of projects that you had to take on that would take the full 2 semesters to actually complete. And again, I jumped into it, and week 3 we were into on-campus recruiting. So everything that I had kind of built up for and thought I could maybe go in and explore was kind of being thrown at me right away. So it was a little bit of a just trying to keep my head above water for a little bit. But no, I look back and I really value the time, and I'm happy I made the decision. Obviously, I went in to end up in a banking role. I specialized in finance when I completed that degree for that reason, and didn't end up in finance. But looking back, I think some of those skills and I'll call them hard skills have benefited me in the marketing and then again transferring over into partnership negotiations and valuing some of these different contracts and then again moving into the business insights and analytics world. Like it all kind of played out in a way that I think helped get me to where I am today.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And the reason I was asking that is because when I look at my my undergrad for my BCom, I find it from the course perspective, I felt there was a lot of theory. I remember when I got my first job, I was like, hey, like someone asked me to start a marketing campaign for us for Canada Day or something. And I was like, cool, let me do it. And then when they I actually sat down and did it. I was like, oh, I don't know if they actually ever taught me how to, do one start to finish, right? And there's more so that practical experience that I needed. But the reason I asked that is because it sounds like your MBA was kind of similar, where I found in my undergrad, it was more so the way it made you think or how you maybe viewed things afterwards was kind of the real value behind it, and obviously the connections and some of those more practical projects you had. But then from there, that's where it lead you down that next rabbit hole. And I guess with that too, do you mind maybe touching on how that brand manager role first came up with Montana's? Because I think that's something cool that everyone that listens to our podcast wants to learn about when maybe they want to get their first job, make that jump, or just move forward to another role. How does that typically take place, and how did that one come about for you? I know you mentioned you had some people there that you knew.
Yeah. So, I mean, and just quickly jumping back and touching base on the MBA too, it's interesting you pointed out like the theory in your undergrad versus, did you get more real world or practical experience in your MBA? I think the interesting point, and everyone says it, like it is very case based and group study based. So you're relying on people a lot more, which I think simulates an actual corporate environment better, whether you know it or not. And the perspectives of the people in those classes are much different. Like everyone's background is totally different. Where they did their undergrad, where they were working previously, where in your undergrad, you're kind of all there. You're all business students. You're all kind of working towards the same goal. You all came from high school. Like there's no different perspectives on how to go about things. So I would say that's another valuable thing that, again, you don't realize in the moment, but looking back, you probably dealt with some tougher situations, just even managing a group and schedules that actually applied to getting out into the real world. But yeah, then leaving Schulich and going to Kara, now Recipe for the brand manager role. It was total fluke. Like I look back and like I said, I had no previous actual marketing experience. I had never written a brief before, which was a brand new thing to me. Like, you talk about all these things to your point in courses and classes on launching a campaign, but you never go through the actual practice of briefing an agency or missing a deadline or something being misprinted wrong and just some of the other nuances that can come up on the day-to-day of the job. So it was honestly, it was through an internal connection that I got introduced to the vice president of the marketing at Kara. He oversaw the full division, family and casual division, which included brands like Swiss Chalet, Montana's, Kelsey's, Eastside Mario's. There's a ton under the umbrella there. But yeah, he took a liking to me, and he ultimately, he kind of put it in words. Like, this can be taught. Are you willing to learn? And that was a little bit of a hook to me, because again, he phrased it back to me in a little bit of a challenge, and I think that's probably what ended up drawing me to the role and ultimately to his leadership and guidance through onboarding.
Yeah, no, that sounds very cool. And then how did that make relationship with that VP go? Was it something, hey, I just want to connect and go for coffee, or just kind of learn more about your career? Or is that something as you started talking a bit more, that's how that challenge came about?
Yeah, well, it kind of was set up as like a coffee chat in the morning. I remember it was before the regular office hours, and I had set up an appointment to go and meet with him, and then he had set up a meeting with another vice president within the company too. And it was casual. Like, this was by no means an interview, or at least it didn't feel like one. And after those two conversations, I connected with the director of marketing on Montana's, who said, hey, he really liked it. Like, do you have time for lunch so we can kind of discuss further next steps? And I thought that was probably going to be the beginning of the interview process. Little did I know that she was showing up to lunch with an offer and a weekend for me to go back and give it some thought. So it kind of happened quick. But like I said, it was right place, right time. And, I can probably say that with a bunch of the different roles and different projects I've gotten to work on here too. It kind of seemed to work out.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And I guess then going back to, now your time at Recipe when it first started, I think one of the things you're saying, you're almost getting your feet wet, right, let's say. And I remember my first networking event ever, people always, I was talking to some people that were 20 years older than me, and one of the key things they said to me that really stuck was always get a job that you're underqualified for, so you can kind of grow into. I think for maybe when you first started that, as you're talking about the brand manager role now, it sounds like that kind of fit. And then it felt like you really needed to build yourself up, and then that's when you would get comfortable. So what was that experience like, where you felt like, I don't know if you felt like you were playing from behind and you needed to prove yourself? What did that kind of go through for you?
Yeah, like you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think playing from behind or playing catch up was absolutely a feeling. I mean, the term imposter syndrome is thrown around quite a bit. Like I definitely had a case of that. And again, I was more frustrated that I wasn't grasping it quick enough, or that I didn't feel like I could make the contributions that I wanted to, or that I was seeing other people make, or other people in different positions within the company. It's the unique part about Recipe, right? With so many different brands under one house, we all sit feet from each other. So, while you don't know exactly what the marketing strategy of the other brand is, you see and hear what other folks are doing, and it's just easy to benchmark yourself against what other brand managers are doing at that time. So I felt like I was behind, and that led to a lot of frustration. I think it took a good year to kind of get into position, like I said, and understand not only the formal corporate part of the industry, but just also how the company worked and the organization operated, and just the different levels and different checkpoints and processes. And then after that, you kind of hit the ground running. But it's already been a year and a half, and you're kind of getting a niche on you want more all of a sudden, but you just kind of learned what you were supposed to be doing in the first place. So, being young and just ambitious and wanting to get further and wanting to move quick, I wasn't really focused on, what I was taking in or what I was learning or some of the experiences I was having. Like, it was always a rush to the next thing, the next project, the next promotion. And that was the mentality at that point. Again, that's how I was measuring success. And I don't know that it was my definition of success, or if it's just what I thought others, maybe expected of me, or were how they were measuring me. But for the longest time, I kind of calculated success as, your altitude on the organizational structure. And it took a lot of time to kind of step back and realize the impact you're making on the business, and the ways that you can kind of influence and lead, from the side, as well as you kind of build up and move into more formal leadership positions in your career.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess for that success that you did have, as you're climbing the ladder through Recipe, was that the maybe the key element in regards to your success? Or was it really just kind of having your head down and focusing on getting this done, moving on to a higher role? Or was there like more to it as well that you think, like looking back, you're speaking to someone who's maybe more in an entry level role within the company, you're like, hey, this is what I think is the key to move up and become successful?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think everyone's going to get a chance, right? I think if you do the right things, and you're prepared for when your time comes, like you'll get the opportunity. It's just kind of what you make of it. And I think I was frustrated with maybe how long my opportunity was taking in my lens, and maybe not in the company or in the business's lens. So, I think the drive and the ambition definitely helped. The competitive nature always, made me want to do more, better, or beat, the other brand, the sister brand beside us at whatever they were doing. So that definitely attributed, but I also look back and I wish I had taken a little bit more time to maybe enjoy some of those accomplishments too in the moment, because it did fly by. Like, there was a period of 3 years when I held 3 or 4 different roles. So yeah, I was climbing the corporate ladder, but it was a blur looking back. Like, I don't like. Some initiatives, some projects blended into roles because they weren't done as I was transitioning into other ones, right? So it was kind of the cool part about taking on some newly created roles, or roles that were identifying a new need as our business was changing and growing. But at the same point, it probably led to a lot of sacrifice, and it didn't lead to a lot of personal time sometimes either, which I wouldn't recommend, at least not being the status quo or every day.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And I guess before we wrap up your route specifically, I have one last question, and then I have 2 wrap-up questions I'd like to ask each guest. I guess now being, in the head of marketing role for 110, is what does that kind of look like on the day-to-day? So let's say someone just starts listening to the podcast at the 40-minute mark, and they're like, hey, like, what does Yianni do for a living, basically, if they didn't know you're the head of marketing? What does that kind of look like, and how would you explain to someone if they just started tuning in?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it can change day to day, week to week, month to month, and honestly, I don't think I've had the same year or similar types of years since I've been at the company for the 9 years, and I love that about it. In my specific role, what I'd oversee is really all the external marketing communications campaigns, anything you're seeing from a commercial to a digital ad, the menu pricing and the menu items that make it onto the menu, on our core menu, or on any of the feature ones if you go in for a specific campaign or limited time offer, all the offer management, managing the marketing budget and the media allocation, and really where we're getting into and where we're investing our money to drive sales and traffic. It's really all encompassing. I'd look at it more as like a mini business you're running more than specific marketing. I think when people think traditional marketing roles, they probably think more KPIs like engagement and impressions, and that stuff is absolutely important, and it's things that we measure and kind of help identify what's working and what's not in certain channels. But at the end of the day, we're responsible for driving guests in our door and making sure that our restaurants are busy across the network. So some days can be an early wake up at like a 2 or 3 a.m. and go to a restaurant for a commercial shoot. You're there for 12 hours and you're just hoping that you brought enough deodorant to last you, because it's a long day. There are different things around food shows. I've traveled quite a bit and gotten out into the field just to meet our franchisees and see our GMs in the actual environment too, which I think is important. It's easy to sit in an office and think what's going on, and I think especially for a true national brand where we have locations coast to coast, the way that guests interact with our brands and the way that our brand stands in certain communities means different in certain parts of Canada than it does others. So I'm not sure that that's really a clear answer for anyone who's wondering what my day-to-day is like, but it really depends, and it can take on a different route depending on what you're pursuing. Everyone who holds my similar position at the company would have a different day-to-day than what I would.
No, I think that's a great answer. It sounds, at least to me, I think that sounds super interesting, and sounds like it's a lot of fun. And I guess with that too, you kind of maybe touched on it in regards to those commercial shoots and having a lot of deodorant. The way I like to wrap up each podcast is I like to get some stories at the end just to kind of put a nice bow on it. So I've said this 172 times now, 171 I guess. I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair. I think about all the cool things I've done in my career so far, right? If I'm going to put you in the same scenario, 103-year-old Yianni, you're on a rocking chair, think about all the things you've done in your career to date so far. What's maybe one story that you're guaranteed to remember that would be like, wow, that was cool that I got to do that for work at one point? What would that story be?
Oh, that is a good question. Yeah, it's cliche to say, but they're looking back, there has been a ton of really cool opportunities that I never thought would come with the role or in the positions I was in. But I'd have to say, the entire experience around securing the title sponsor rights to the Briar was pretty unique. As I mentioned, I've had a chance to be a part of starting a new restaurant concept, from ground up. I've worked with tons of different senior executive leaders and TV personalities and all the cool different marketing campaigns we've done. But going through that bidding process, blind and really not knowing what we're doing, to being at the press conference, making the announcement where it's aired, on global news, so my parents back home could sit there and shakily record their camera on the TV, so they had a copy of the footage. To working with people like Brad Gushu, who ultimately ended up being our first brand ambassador, for lack of a better term, being featured in the Montana's commercial. I didn't realize how big and monumental this tournament was, and the championship draw was ending. Brad and Team Canada were cleaning up another Briar title, and we're walking onto the ice to hand out the tankard on a national broadcast. And that was kind of the hit me moment. It was like, how the hell did I end up here? What steps did and didn't I take that got this kid from Kingston in this position? And it was just surreal. There was so much work that went into that from all parts of the company, definitely all parts of our brand. The support we had from our franchise network was huge. They were all so excited. And for the inaugural year to go that way and go as well as it did, walking out onto that ice, it hit me, and so that's one that I'm gonna keep with me for a long time. Probably the highlight of my career so far.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And to be honest, I had Nick Salsky with PointsBet on the podcast before, and he was touching about sponsorships they had with curling. It's funny enough how you said it, where the brand maybe means different things in different areas of Canada, and he was saying to me just in regards to curling how impactful curling is to different parts of Canada and how meaningful it is. So if a brand partners with, let's say, curling, I think he was saying was, those loyal fans will then engage with that brand. And that's not maybe something you see all the time with the different sports and different markets you have in Canada. So I'm sure that's definitely a cool experience.
It was crazy to see live. It was something else. That curling community is probably the most loyal fan base I think I've seen at any sporting event.
For sure. I remember, I don't know how old I was, but in university I used to work at TD Place in Ottawa. We hosted the Briar.
Yeah.
And I think I worked 67 hours that week because I wanted to work every shift. And I missed a lot of school that my parents didn't know about. But I just remember the fans. It was like 7 a.m. They had, their kilts. Some people had some bagpipes, and every day they were smiling. They even come bring us some Timmies when we were working outside. So it was a really different to some of the other fans we experienced at the stadium. But that leads me then to my last question. Right, we kind of went to the stories when we were 103. Well, maybe some things you'd remember. Let's go back to maybe that injury that you had at 17. Right, if you could go back in time, using that time machine, and speak to a younger version of yourself, what's maybe one thing that you've learned to date so far that you can speak to a younger version? You'd be like, hey, this is something I learned that you really should take with you throughout these years to come.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this question because, as I told you, I've listened to the podcast, so I knew it was coming. And I couldn't break it down between two that I think I'd pass on, and not to get preachy and not to act like I've reached some level of wisdom here, but I think the two things that I've probably taken away looking back is, you don't need to fight your natural skills, right? And that was that big thing back to the sales persona and personality and just everything that I was trying to fight, that I had this negative connotation associated with the word or the term. Looking at my role and my position, like everyone has different backgrounds and skill sets, and we've all ended up in a similar role or at the same place, right? So I'd say embrace whatever you have, whatever your natural skills and talents you have, and find a way to line it up to get you to where you want to go. It doesn't need to determine your ultimate career path or where you end up. And then the second one, maybe not so much at the 17-year-old level, because he probably wouldn't have understood this, but I think I've kind of touched on it throughout parts of our conversation here. And I'd say don't be in a rush to plateau your career. That advice was given to me by someone much smarter and much more experienced when I was 22. And as I mentioned, everything was about the next project or the next next promotion. There's going to get to a point where there's only so far you can go, and make sure that it's where you want to go and not you're going there because you think it's an expectation or you think it's what people want you to do. Take the time to enjoy the experience and some of those accomplishments and those successes, because you don't get them back. So definitely something I look back at and wish I'd done a little bit more of in the past, call it 5 to 9 years. But yeah, those would be the two kind of main takeaways I think I'd use as advice for a younger Yianni.
Yeah, that's perfect, and exactly why I like ending the podcast with that. So what I've been finding recently, some of these advice that we're getting at the end, this makes me go on a little tangent after the podcast and just go look in the mirror and be like, hey, what am I doing? Or like thinking, hey, where do I really want to go? But no, that's fantastic, and I really appreciate you coming on. It's been great hearing your story to date so far.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you reaching out, and this was a great conversation. I'm glad it finally happened.
Yeah, no, I know there's a lot of exciting things happening with what you guys were doing on Montana's, and obviously I had some movement of my own life, but yeah, I'm glad we were finally able to do this, and with that, I guess that's it to episode 172. So thank you so much for coming on.